Hey everyone, welcome back. It's December 4th, 2024, and wow, the markets are really buzzing today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so today we're going to deep dive into this market briefing from PantheonAI.
Okay.
They cover just about everything, global events, specific sectors, you name it.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, and this one, let me tell you, it has a little bit of everything.
Oh, really?
We've got martial law, we've got oil intrigue, we've even got a retail paradox that I think is really going to make you scratch your head.
Okay, I am intrigued. Let's get into it.
All right, so let's start with the market. What are those major U.S. indices telling us today?
Okay.
The S&P 500 is up just slightly. You
Right.
might think, okay, that's a good sign, right?
Yeah, usually.
But then the Dow Jones decided to dip just a little bit.
Huh.
Then to make things even more interesting, the tech-heavy Nasdaq that climbed quite a bit.
Wow.
While the Russell 2000, which focuses more on those smaller companies, it took a bit of a tumble.
Okay, so all over the place.
What do you make of all of that?
Well, you got to love a good market puzzle, right? What I think is really interesting here is that it looks like investors are feeling a little bit cautious. You
Yeah.
know, the slight rise in the S&P 500 and then the Nasdaq climb, probably fueled by tech.
Yeah.
That suggests maybe there's some optimism about the larger companies.
Okay.
But that dip in the Dow and that even more noticeable drop in the Russell 2000, that could mean that investors are a little worried about the growth potential of those smaller companies, especially those that are focused on the domestic market.
So it's like a proceed with caution sign flashing over certain parts of the market.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, we have Bitcoin holding steady,
Oh, as it does.
as it tends to do, and Ethereum is surging.
So Bitcoin is playing it cool, like the reliable store of value that it is. But why is Ethereum kind of stealing the show?
Well, there's a couple things at play here.
Okay.
First, you have these decentralized applications, or dApps, as they call them.
Yeah.
They're built on the Ethereum blockchain, and they're gaining some serious traction.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah. For example, you have this platform called Decentraland. Have you heard of this one?
I have, yeah.
It's like a virtual world where you can buy and sell digital real estate using Ethereum.
Wild.
It's been exploding in popularity, and that kind of growth is definitely catching the eye of investors.
They want in on that action.
Exactly. And second, Ethereum has some major upgrades coming up to its protocol, which could make it even faster and more efficient.
Even better.
Yeah, so there's a lot of buzz about its future potential.
Sounds like the crypto world is never short on excitement.
Never a dull moment.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that happened over the weekend that really shook things up.
Correct.
South Korea declared martial law.
Wow.
Even if it was only for a short period, what kind of impact did that have on the markets?
Yeah, you're right. Even temporary events like that can really send those ripples through the global market. And while martial law was quickly lifted, it definitely rattled investor confidence in the region.
Next.
It raised concerns about, potential instability and what that might mean for international trade and investment in South Korea.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what kind of business decisions are being put on hold because of this uncertainty.
Absolutely. And speaking of shaky business decisions, let's talk about General Motors.
Oh, boy.
They just reported a massive $5 billion hit.
$5 billion with a B.
With a B from their Chinese joint venture, mainly due to impairment charges.
Okay, that's a big red flag, isn't it?
That's a huge red flag.
For those of us who don't speak fluent finance, what does an impairment charge actually mean?
Basically, it means that GM is admitting that its investment in China isn't worth as much as they initially thought. It's like buying a fancy sports car, only to find out it's got a rusty engine and faulty brakes.
Yeah.
The value has decreased significantly, and this write-down really highlights those challenges foreign automakers are facing in China.
So not only are local Chinese brands becoming more competitive, but the overall demand for vehicles in China might be slowing down.
Exactly. And all of this uncertainty in Asia, from South Korea's political situation to the shifting dynamics in the Chinese auto market, it's definitely making investors nervous.
It sounds like Asia is a region to watch very closely right now.
For sure.
But let's pivot to something that seems to always be on everyone's mind.
Yep.
Oil, with the OPEC Plus meeting coming up, are we all headed for another round of price hikes at the pump?
Well, the oil markets are a bit like a thriller movie right now.
Oh, really?
Full of suspense and potential plot twists.
Oh, boy.
Oil futures are already ticking upward in anticipation of this meeting.
So what are the experts predicting? Are we going to be paying an arm and a leg at the pump soon?
It's really hard to say for sure, but there there are a few things to think about.
I'll
The
put it
big
down.
expectation is that OPEC Plus is going to decide to delay lifting those production curbs they put in place a while back,
Right.
which would mean that the global oil supply stays tighter,
Mm-hmm.
which usually pushes prices up.
All right.
And then if you add in the increasing U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil exports to the mix,
Yeah.
it could definitely create a perfect storm for those price increases.
So it sounds like we should all brace ourselves for some potential bumps at the gas pump.
Yeah, it's a bit of a waiting game at this point.
Maybe this is a good time to revisit those electric car brochures.
That's not a bad idea. And that actually brings us to another interesting point. While the oil markets are keeping us all on edge, the renewable energy sector that's actually thriving.
Oh, that's right. We can't forget about the clean energy revolution that's happening. Is it really growing that fast, even with everything going on in oil?
Absolutely. I mean, globally, governments are pouring more and more money into solar, wind, and those other renewable sources.
Makes sense.
There's a real push for energy independence. And, of course, everyone is looking for ways to combat climate change.
It's like there's this race going on between the old and the new energy world.
Exactly. And this shift toward renewables is opening up all sorts of new opportunities,
Like what?
like companies involved in energy storage technologies, for example.
Oh,
They're seeing huge growth. Think about it. As we rely more on solar and wind power, we're going to need better ways to store that energy for when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
right.
And then there are those smart grids, which are basically energy networks that can adapt to changes in supply and demand in real time.
So even with all the uncertainty in the oil markets, there's a sense of optimism in the renewable energy sector.
Definitely. I think so.
Okay, let's move on to another topic that always seems to be making headlines. Finance interest rates and inflation seem to be the buzzwords of the century.
It feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? And you're right. They're huge factors right now. Central banks around the world are walking a tightrope, trying to keep inflation under control without causing economies to stall out.
It's a delicate balance.
A very delicate balance.
So are they managing to strike that balance? What's the latest?
Well, recent data shows that inflation might be easing up a little bit, which is good news for everyone.
Oh, that's good.
That little bit of relief has given the markets a little bit of a breather.
But it feels like things could change on a dime.
You got that right. We're all kind of waiting with bated breath for those upcoming inflation reports. Any surprises there could throw everything off and lead to sudden policy changes, which, of course, would send shockwaves through the markets.
So you're saying we should all stay glued to the financial news?
It's never a bad idea to keep yourself informed, especially in these volatile times.
Okay, noted. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from market trends and geopolitical tremors to the latest in tech and the future of energy. What's the big takeaway from all of this? What do you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think if we look at everything we've discussed today, the one common thread is this potential for market volatility in the coming months. That situation in South Korea, the challenges in the Chinese auto market, that nail-biting anticipation around the OPEC Plus meeting, they all kind of point to a period of uncertainty ahead.
So how should our listeners navigate this potential storm? Any advice on what they should be doing with all of this information?
The best advice I can give is to stay informed and be adaptable. Keep a close eye on global events, particularly those that could impact major economies. Any developments in China are always worth paying attention to.
Okay.
Also keep tabs on those technological advancements and any changes in regulations, especially in the tech world, which moves at lightning speed.
For sure.
And of course, with all the twists and turns in the energy sector, it's definitely a good idea to stay tuned to the latest news, especially the outcome of that OPEC Plus meeting we talked about.
Great advice. It sounds like knowledge is power, especially when things are this unpredictable.
Exactly.
But knowing what to watch is half the battle. So let's do a quick recap of those key areas for our listeners. First up, keep those eyes peeled for any global events that could shake things up, especially anything happening in those major economies like China.
Right, and don't forget about the tech sector. Keeping up with the latest advancements and regulatory changes can give you an edge.
And lastly, that energy sector, it's like a drama unfolding right before our eyes. So staying informed about oil prices and renewable energy developments, that's crucial.
Exactly. Those are the key areas to focus on.
Okay, listeners, we've given you a lot to think about today. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question that's a little more personal. Think about your own investment portfolio or even just your everyday spending habits, given all the uncertainties we've talked about, especially in those Asian markets, and the exciting rise of renewable energy. How do you see these trends playing out in your own financial decisions in the next year? What adjustments might you make to stay ahead of the curve?
It's a great question and one we should all be asking ourselves.
It really is. The world is changing so rapidly, and the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate it all.
Absolutely. And sometimes just thinking about these things and having these conversations like this is the first step to making smarter decisions.
That's what we're all about here on the Dink Dive, giving you the information and the insights to make sense of this complex world we live in. So thanks for diving in with us today. We hope you enjoyed the journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions. We'll be back soon with more deep dives into the topics that matter most. Until then, happy investing, happy spending, and happy navigating this crazy, ever-changing world after.